Hi, and welcome to Kitchen Conversations. Welcome to my podcast. We have one goal, one objective, and that is to get someone to pick up a paddle for the very first time and try this game of pickleball. Now, that said, we're going to step out of pickleball just for a moment and into the game of paddle. Now, you've likely been calling it Padel. I know I was. But the truth is, it's actually paddle. We're going to talk today to Canada's paddle pioneer, a gentleman named Bill Stamile. Bill brought the game from Argentina to Canada in 1992. It's a fascinating story. He's one of the most passionate sports people I've ever met, I've ever spoken to, and it was a real honor to get to spend some time with Bill recently. He'll tell you all about the game, his passion for it, the work he's done, where it is today, and where he sees it heading. Well, Bill, welcome to the podcast, and a big thank you for being here today. I had a chance to talk to your son, Andreas, a few weeks ago. It was an enlightening conversation. He spoke very fondly of his relationship with you and how much the game meant to him. And of course, he's done amazing things within the sport of paddle. And so a real pleasure to meet him and a real pleasure to meet you today. So I want to start by saying thank you for being here.
And thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure being here. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for paying attention to our sport, and it's growing and expanding in Canada. And anytime we have or at least I have an opportunity to promote it, I do so. Much appreciate it, and I hope that I can say some things that are going to be fun and exciting for all of us.
Well, absolutely. You know, it's something I play pickleball, Bill, but within my pickleball community, there's a lot of chatter and a lot of conversation around the sport paddle. And Andreas and I were joking a bit when we first met because we tend to call it Padel. You know, the local group here continues. In fact, this morning I was at the club talking to a club member and I was mentioning that I was going to meet with you. And their first question was, well, how do you say it? Is it paddle or is it Padel? And I said, I've got the official word. It's paddle. So we've cleared the air in Ontario. Just, I'll take credit for that this morning, but I did try to straighten
you have full credit for that. The way I try and explain it is just go PADL, forget the E. So if you forget E in paddle, you go paddle, and that's about as close. Unless you're a Spanish speaking like me and you go padel, but let's not go that far.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting conversation because, I heard about the game a few years ago, Bill, to be honest. And, we kind of, as racket players, we keep our eye on the landscape of racket sports and we're intrigued and we're interested. And I even heard about a game a couple days ago, a brand new one called Tip Tee. And I don't know if you've touched on that one yet, but it's a modified version of tennis. Yeah. The fellow that started it is Steve Bellamy. And you may know Steve Bellamy through, I think he was the gentleman that started the Tennis Channel back in the early 2000s and ultimately sold that. So I've reached out to him with some interest in what that sport's doing and where it's heading. But for me, Bill, personally, my wife and I are both very much into health and wellness and fitness and, looking for health and longevity. And so anything that gets people off the couch and gets them active and socially engaged, I'm a big fan of. So the chance to talk to you about paddle today is really something. I really have a lot of things I want to cover on the sport itself, how it ended up in Canada, the legacy that you've built, and your role in the game, Bill, for sure. But would you mind starting for us by taking us back to your childhood a bit and tell me when sports first became part of your life? And clearly it's defined you in so many ways, through career and golf pro and paddle founder. And I mean, it's been such an identifiable part of who you've become. So if you don't mind, could you just run with that and give me a bit of background?
Yeah, you get a chuckle out of this because I grew up in the sort of on the wrong side of the tracks in a suburb outside of Buenos Aires. So we didn't have very much, and other than a soccer ball, as you can imagine. My brother only got one brother. For Christmas, I remember this clearly. We'd all get a rubber soccer ball each. That was the big event, and then to make a longer story much short, we'd play with it. Of course, it would just disintegrate because that was the deal. And then what we'd do is we'd stuff it with newspapers and elastic and twine and keep playing for the rest of the year until both the balls were basically, there was nothing left. So that's really what it was. In 1965, mom and dad decided to move to Canada for reasons that I can easily guess. Argentina wasn't exactly with a lot of future. So we came up to Canada. I didn't know anything other than soccer. I remember in elementary school, I just sat there as a foreign kid with maybe four English words, and I don't know. I remember a ball coming to me. I thought, well, that's a weird looking ball because it looks like a banana. It was a football. So I grabbed the football and I just kicked it. And apparently, I kicked it so far that the kids just, you know how you used to kick the ball and catch it and throw it back. Well, they just all went like this, and I became everybody wanted me to kick the ball. But that was elementary school, and then we went to junior high, and basketball and volleyball was the two games, and as it turned out, and not because I was a big kid, and I did really really well in junior high. Basketball and volleyball. I was nominated to the best junior high athlete at St. Gregory's School in those days for what the last 20 years or something like that. And then after that, I went to high school. Ended up being the top scorer in basketball in high school. Played volleyball as well. And then in 74, I was hired as an assistant pro at a golf course. Got it to, I'm hurrying up through this. I got it to about a +2 handicap in golf. Didn't get any sponsors, so as it turns out, I'm not a Tiger Woods, but I got the ball pretty good in those days. In 1976, I played volleyball for Mount Royal University. We ended up winning Canada West, which is a big tournament of all the. We did that. Then I went up to U of A and continued my volleyball up there. So basically, sport is what I graduated as a phys ed education with phys ed major and recreation administration minor, and so out of University of Alberta, and just been involved in sports all the way through. A lot of volunteer work, a lot of coaching, soccer, of course, and all the sports that I just mentioned. So it's basically a big part of my life. So that's really what it was. And I agree with you. I don't care what you do, be active, get up off your butt, and you want to play pickleball, paddle, or whatever it is, just do it. Yeah, and so I have a joke about pickleball just because you told me, and when people talk to me, do you play pickleball? And I say, listen, I'm 72 years old. I'm too young to play pickleball. So
I'll play that later. I've got lots of time for pickleball. I love it. I love that.
yeah, I'm just half kidding you, of course, but I have fun with folks. But so that's in a nutshell.
Yeah.
That's really my sport background, or at least my sport love.
Right.
Yeah.
No, Bill, it's terrific. It's such a passionate conversation that you can have around that. And, both of my boys have benefited from coaches in their lives. My wife and I hold coaching and coaches in very high regard. We think they're the most influential people in a kid's life at the right time. And going through high school, both my boys played volleyball, one of them basketball. They've been active and continue to be active today, in skiing and outdoors and so on and so forth. And I just don't think there's a better way for a kid to grow up. Put something in their hand and get them out the door. It's paramount today. So yeah, fantastic. I think we're lucky, Bill, when we find something in life that we love and ultimately ends up paying us. I mean, that's the best combination in the world, to do what you love and somebody's crazy enough to pay you to do it. I think it's just a terrific start. So, oh, that's awesome. What a career. Yeah, what a career. Well, thank you for that. It's a great introduction, Bill. I appreciate that. Tell me then about paddle, and tell me the very moment that you bumped into this wonderful game. I've got a lot of questions about it specifically, but I'd love to hear the very moment that you first kind of were wandering along, where that was, and how that kind of ended up leading you to do what you've done over the last several decades.
Yeah, well, it's actually a cool story, but we have three boys, and Andres, who you've met, is our third born. And my wife is from Argentina as well, from Buenos Aires. So you can imagine we lived in Canada. So when Andres was born in '91, we wanted to go over there around Christmas time and show him off to the grandparents on mother's side, etc. So the grandparents were so happy. They said, "Listen, you know what? We're taking you guys to the beach for a whole month. And you might as well shoot me, because me and the beach and water, what am I going to do? Just sit there?" So anyway, we went to the beach, and I get up early, I have my coffee, read my paper, and then I'm going, geez, what do I do? So I just started walking and walking. So all of a sudden, I see people walking around. This is my very first paddle, walking around with this implement, and I go, what the hell is that? Because I played quite a bit of badminton as well. I go, so And then I didn't pay attention the first day. Then the next day I see more people. So I stalked them. Really. I walked around and I followed them, followed them. Sure enough, there's a beautiful cement walled paddle court right in front of the beach. So wow! So I sat there and I sat there, and for hours. In fact, so long with the first time I saw it that they almost called the cops because they were used to me going away and coming back, going away, coming back. I'm sitting there. Well, by the time, I'd sat there for so long, people were coming and going, and they needed a fourth. And somebody up there just went like this. Oh, sure, why not? Yeah, you come over here. So I get out there and I think I had my clogs on or something, and that was it. The minute I played 3 minutes, I go, well, I got to take this thing back to Canada. I mean, this is a fantastic sport, but it's all Andreas's fault that we have paddle in Canada because we had to go show off. Next time you talk to him, you tell him that. But that's no, it's not my fault. No, it's all his. But that's how I first saw it. That's where the light bulb went on. From as you and I spoke from my sporting background, it's just something about the sport and the angles and the fun and it was social and people on. And I thought, wow, this is really really cool. So anyways, that's what happened. That would have been like by March of '92, I came back with magazines and God knows what else, and I created the Paddle Association of Canada to sort of plant the seed for the sport the first time.
Sure. Well, Bill, and I want to get into that in a bit of detail, but before we do, tell me in your opinion, in all the experience you've had in sports and certainly in racket sports and specifically paddle, what is it about racket sports in a general sense that becomes so immediate and so addictive? Because for me, it was pickleball. For others, it's squash. For others, it was racquetball. For some, it's paddle. I mean, there just seems to be a common thread amongst racket sports and maybe sports in general, but I'm, specifically focusing on racket sports with the podcast. But in your opinion, your professional opinion, let's go there with with your background. What do you think it is, Bill? Is it the social side of the games themselves? Is it the physical? I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, I played a lot of badminton. That's the only racket sport I played was badminton. I got to be pretty good at it. You have an implement in your hand, and you have an object that you have to go hit with the implement in your hand, and it's almost a quick gratification, whether you miss or not. You have something to do. Whereas if, for instance, if in golf or something like that, I ended up teaching myself, but very frustrating because you don't get that instant. You whiff. But with a racket sport, it seems to me to begin with. You see, the learning curve seems to be fairly quickly. Not saying you're going to be a pro right off the bat, but at least you know what I played. I got to hit a lot of stuff. I moved around, and there was some success there. When it comes to the doubles racket sports, then you start adding the teamwork, the socializing, the camaraderie, the friendship. So it adds more to it. But I think the I mean, volleyball and basketball, the same thing. It takes a while before you get that to the point where you say to yourself, you know what, I actually kind of feel good about I've done something prop, but in racket sports, that's that. Now, when it comes to the paddle part of it, and pickleball as well, actually doubles, tennis, and squash, you have a partner, and I think that's a big part of this. The sport of paddle is the fact that you're close in, you can hear what everybody else is saying, or not saying, and it helps the moment. It's just it's a lot more special. Aside from all of the technique and the tactics and the angles and the loft, there's 2-on-2, and it seems that's a good part of our sport.
Yeah, for sure, Bill. It's great. It's great insight, and I agree with it. I think one of my favorite things about being part of the community of pickleball specifically, but racket sports in the broader sense, is the opportunity to introduce someone new to the game. And for me, I've had that chance on multiple occasions to walk out onto a court with someone who's never done it, and I've yet to find someone, Bill, who has come off of that experience and said anything other than, "How do I get involved?" how do I play more? How do I learn more? And so I'm very intrigued by it, because your point about golf's well taken. I mean, someone once said to me too, golf's one of the few sports, if not the only sport, where nothing happens until you make a move. You look at ice hockey, basketball, volleyball, there's always something in motion. But with golf, until you take a swat at that little white ball, not a whole lot's happening. It's really on your terms and conditions when that game starts and stops. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. So Bill, let's jump into 1992. You've been down there. You've shown off Andreas to the family. Everybody tells you he's the cutest baby in the world, of course, and he was, I'm sure. Yeah, a handsome young man, I'm sure. Yeah. Tell me how the Calgary warehouse becomes part of your story, and subsequently, what was the groundwork that you were doing at that time, and the passion, obviously, that you got. I mean, it was instant, which I find really fascinating. Now, it's one thing to say I enjoyed the game, I got invited in, I met some nice fellows, and I played, but it's a whole nother story, Bill, to then decide to bring it back to your home country at this point in your life. So tell me about that. Tell me about 1992.
Well, 90, yeah. Actually, the biggest sales I had in 1992 when I brought it back, because my brother and we get along really well. And I said, "Well, you got to see this thing." Like, well, I got records, I got magazines, and he said, "Look, I'm busy. I got stuff to do." No, I said, "You got to drop your stuff," and because I had a friend of mine who was an Olympian wrestler, and he had a warehouse that he was training, high level wrestlers, and on the other side there was a boxing club. So you can imagine, sweat and bang and screaming. And Alex is his name, and I said, listen, I've got this new sport and blah blah. The ceilings are nice and high, and we got a little bit of extra room. So he points to the corner. They had boxes and dust and everything else. He said, look, if you can figure that out, you can just go ahead and use that. I don't need it for the time being. So that's how we got the space. And then I had to go and figure out how to do it, because I'm not a very good builder and tools guy, but my brother is. So I said, you got to build me a paddle court, and you go, what the hell is that? We have a paddle court. So I explained to him, and but it was a big to do for me to get him to do that. Of course, now he's into it a lot, but so we ended up getting the location. We bought chain link fence, which is not what you're supposed to do, but that's what we did anyway. And we bought 2x4s, 2x6s, and plywood, and we built a court. It looked like a chicken coop more than anything else, but it was perfect. Because Angelo's his name. He was 10 meters by 20 meters, perfectly squared. It was exactly what it ought to be. There wasn't an inch off, and that's where we got to play. And being a school teacher for a while, one of the students was a top tennis player in the province in Alberta here. And I said, Steve, I got this crazy little thing I want to talk to you about. I got this racket sport. It's not tennis, but it's got walls, and um, and I'd like you to come out and try it. But it's a doubles game, so you need to bring 3 other guys with you. And he says, well, I've got my tennis and I teach. And I go, oh, come on, just come on over. He still called me Mister at the time because of our relationship. So they came out, and I gave them paddles and balls. I explained to them, and sure enough, they started playing a little bit. And that competitive spirit, I think, I don't care. Like, if you and I have known each other for a long time, we've competed in, I don't know, baseball, soccer. It's always there, right? I'm going to beat you, you're going to beat me. So these guys, even though they were in a different sport, it was a racket sport, and they were playing with this. There was a tennis ball of all things, and of course, tennis players before, as soon as they start, the balls are just going 100 miles an hour, and they're hitting the back wall. And so that's what happened. But they got hooked. And I said, listen, you guys, I'm not going to charge you anything. I just want you to play, but bring some more people out. And then I have a circle of friends. And so that's how it worked out. And as it turned, those same 4 are still playing to today. The very first 4 top players that played are still playing today. They've competed for Canada in many of the world championships that I've organized and taken them to. And so that's how it started here at that grungy, dusty old
Wow, on the back of a
warehouse.
boxing warehouse almost. Yeah. I can almost smell it, Bill. I can almost, when I think about a boxing warehouse or a boxing arena, and yeah, wrestling, all of that
Oh
together.
yeah,
And
yeah.
there's a bit of irony for those of us that are on the outside looking in at the game paddle, because I've heard other people refer to it as kind of, like a cage match almost. So there's a bit of a nuance there between perhaps the boxing and the wrestling, for sure. What a great story.
Well, that's interesting. Interesting you say that because, well, first of all, Alex and the other fellow who was a top boxing coach, he actually used to come over and play paddle because of the footwork. So and you get bored, right? He says, "All right, guys, that's enough of grappling. Let's get over here and build it." So I ran him through a bunch of things. But the other interesting thing is that we had a karate group come in, and the karate group, and I said, sure, it's space and it's usable. So they, the kids are screaming and yelling and doing this and that, and then the gentleman says, okay, now we're going in, and sure enough, right, as soon as you cross the door, you do one of these, and it becomes their dojo. And and then I got those kids to play. So as it turned out, we just had a whole mishmash of individuals and youngsters and elderly and the whole. That's how it started with one court. In fact, that was the very first court ever built in North America, not just Canada, not just Calgary. There was no paddle in the
Wow,
continent,
Bill.
period, at
What a
the time.
story.
So
What a start,
there,
though. What a start,
yeah.
and just think about the coincidence of all of this. I'm at a point in my life now, Bill. I'm 59. So I've been around just long enough to be able to draw a line back in my life to certain events and certain decisions, certain choices that I made or I didn't make, and how those choices have had such an impact on where I am today. And the funny part is in that moment when those decisions are being made, they're not particularly, you know, it's just either kind of this or that. And but now that I'm a bit older, yeah, yeah, and I think about you had you not have gone down, to visit with your folks, and had you not have been there at that time, and had those guys not been playing, and had you not been a bit bored, and there were so many things that had to sort of coincide in order for you to be there in that moment, and I might add to be open-minded enough to interpret this as an opportunity. You didn't just say, "Well, this is neat," and spend a bit of time with it. You saw it immediately. It was in that moment, and subsequently, back it comes to Canada. What an amazing story. Good on you. Wow.
Well, the other thing too, Mike, is I know people from being fortunate enough people all over the planet, and a lot of them would have started as founders like I did, and they come and go. But there are very few, and I don't say this for any other reason, but it's the truth. There are very few people that have stuck with this game daily, almost all the way through, for 34 years in the world. And so, I mean, not that it means anything other than it's just that's how deep into this sport. Into the sport I am or I was. But yeah, you're right. Though at the beginning, it must have been something in my sporting background, the being open to things it's something clicked and it stayed there. But yeah, that's
Well,
the start.
Bill, there's certain people, you're one of them. And I say this, at the risk of embarrassing you, but there are just certain people that the world needs to show up at the right time and to do the right thing and to have the passion to drive that idea forward, because it would have been quite easier for you to just have taken it in as a casual moment in your life. Even the fact that you brought it back, you set it up in the warehouse in Calgary in 1992, that's all fine and dandy. But to be able to stick with it, my father-in-law had something. He had great stickum. We used to call it stickum because when he sunk his teeth into something, yeah, when he decided something was going to happen, 100 people, Bill, could tell him it was a bad idea. And sometimes it was, honestly, it was, sometimes it was a bad idea, but yeah, he would stick with it, and he, was very successful in his endeavors, and I admired him for that. One of the qualities that he carried forward that I couldn't quite get to the point that he got to, but he was never afraid of anything. Risk, reward, he just threw it all on the table, and he went for it. So I admire that in you. I admire the
Well,
tenacity.
I
Yeah.
identify with that. To add to actually, you sparked something. To add to this, paddle actually died in Canada about 3 times. Because it died because they needed the space at the first place at the warehouse, and they built, you got 2 months and we need the space, so it died. Oh geez, what are we going to do? And then the people that came out there, they were teaching at a semi-private club called the Edgemont Club here in Calgary, and they said, listen, we'll talk to the owner because he's got an outdoor tennis court, and hardly anybody ever uses it. So the owner, being a visionary that he was, with the help of them, we ended up, fast forward, we ended up taking the outdoor tennis court and putting 2 beautiful concrete walled paddle courts, and that's where the sport was until 2002, right? And so that's what we did. Our tri-nationals, our the national team training. That's where paddle was. There was no paddle anywhere else in Canada. And then it died because he sold it, and the sport died again for about 6 months until I by accident I ran across a school, which the courts are still there now, and I went over to talk to the principal. He said, "I love the idea, but we don't have any money. You know, we're a school, we don't have any money, but it's there." Talk to the community, talk to the school board. To make a long story short, I don't know how we did it. That's probably one of the most magical things ever done in the history of the sport. They actually all agreed to it. Said, "Look, you go ahead and use it if you need to." So we did that. And so it came alive again, and then it died. It died in well about 10 years ago, in my view, because a different group of individuals took over the sport, and not much has happened since then. But persistence, it's just I never even questioned it. It needs to.
Yeah. Well, sometimes we find our calling and we're not really sure why, but we find ourselves just so connected to something, Bill. It's just impossible to let it go. And no matter what happens and no matter what those challenges are that come along, we just find a way through it. We just find a way to either work around it or through it or over it or under it, but there's always a solution. So all of that happens in 1992, which is a fascinating part of it. How does the sport then grow? Give me a bit of a history on from that first court to kind of all of the work that you put into it, the travel that you did. You've been around the globe. You're an advocate, an ambassador for the game. You've been involved in it at the highest levels. It just seems like, from that inception, and maybe that could have just been it. I mean, maybe had it not been you, it would have just kind of been that warehouse and people played it for a bit of time and away it went. But you took it to a whole different level, Bill. Tell me your story on that.
Yeah, because I didn't look at it as a business. You see, I looked at it as something that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I was so happy about it. I want everybody else to enjoy it too. But '92. So then when we went into the semi-private club, we that's where we started to develop players and leagues and etc. in our own little way. We only had two courts. We went to the first tri-national tournament that our friends in Mexico invited us to in Acapulco, and I took the gang that I told you about earlier. They went there, have the uniforms and all that stuff. And in fact, while they were playing, they're still asking me, is it okay if I volley the ball or do I have to let it bounce? One of those situations. So, the very gracious Mexican friends of ours said, you're here, your flag is here, you're excited, don't worry about it. You win, you lose, it doesn't matter. So we did all of that. We went to tri-nationals. The very first world championship that we went to was in Mendoza, Argentina. So we trained place. We took the kids over there. And then in 1996, we went to Madrid for the World Championship there. And we had to put it, the men played fairly well. They ended up, I believe, ninth in the world in those days. And which for us, you're only playing a few months and we only had out sports. And then we just kept going back and forth through all of the World Championships, developing more of the sport. But it was only really in Calgary, and we had the 3-4 courts in one site that we played at. After in 2002, the owner of the club that we were at sold it, and we had to somewhere. So at the school, that's where really everything happened. Yeah, just traveled all over the world, juniors and seniors. So a couple of highlights that we did. It's 2008, actually in 2006, while we were playing in that semi-private club, we had some people together, and I said, look, something big has to happen here. I know people all over the world are growing this sport. I shouldn't say all over because there was only 15 countries then, and we got to do something big. And so that's when I planted the seed because I knew some of the guys at the World Federation. I said, look, what would it take for Canada to host the World Championship? And they gave me a list. And so very ambitious. It almost didn't happen because I went to the board and I said, this is what we're going to do. And well, that's too big for us. We're too small. I go, no, it's not. So anyway, to make a long story short, 2006, Murcia, Spain. We made a presentation. I had the Tourism Calgary that backed us, the province that backed us, the city that backed us. We're going to have the World Championship in 2008. And so that was a big event for us, and it should have taken us to a different level, but it didn't. There just wasn't enough momentum. And all along, we kept bringing new people in, and people that traveled to Canada would know of us and come over and play. then 2008 happened, and it was the very first time that the World Paddle Championship was held in a non-Spanish speaking country. I'm fully bilingual, of course, so that's I was able to do that. So so they came to Calgary, and of course, we didn't have enough facilities to do that, so we ended up renting a soccer center. We put up my brother actually. We put up the four courts that we played the World Championship in, and we had some other outdoor courts at the school. And so we had 16 countries, seven languages, 220 players, volunteers coming out of our yin yang, and we pulled it off. Even to this very day, I still get calls. People say, "Stamile, when are you going to have another World Championship there?" We like the city, the people. It was great, and the Banff, and the Lake Louise, and all that. I go, well, listen, if I had the structures, I would do it tomorrow, but we weren't able to do that. So that was 2008, and Andreas actually in his 17th year. Then he coached. He was coaching everybody, but he coached a ladies team, and they ended up fifth in the world. That was the best finish ever for the Canadian ladies paddle team. I'm not sure when that's going to be duplicated. That was 2008. And then 2009, of course, we had our best showing, which was in Seville, the last year that Andreas played and coached. So the boys came in third in the world. So when you read the history of paddle and championships, and you go Argentina, Spain, Brazil, Mexico, and all of Canada, you go, wait a minute, it must be a typo. Well, that was an incredible event to go, and as a father, but also he played against somebody that was ended up Paco Navarro, which ended up being one of the top players in the world. He was playing against Andres and his partner, and they lost 6-4, 6-4. So had I been a better father, and I should have, I could have taken him out, and I just couldn't figure out a way for him to go to what do you call it, to Europe and train, etc. But as it turned out, he stuck with the game. But so that's sort of the how we came to that point. Then we had a couple of world championships in Cancun, so those are kind of semi-memorable because we didn't do all that well. But and then after that, our last World Championships that Canada ever played in was 2014, and we haven't done anything. We've sort of disappeared off the map since, which is unfortunate. But
Yeah. What was that moment like though when Andreas, like, to place that well in the world? And to your point, people thinking that must be a typo. Why is Canada why is Canada listed here? That for you and all that you had done up to that point, Bill, that must have been a moment.
that was well. It's you go. From my coaching background, you always prepare your kids. You say, listen, first, we're going to have fun. Second, we're going to compete as best as we can. And third, it's memorable. You're going to be put in, in those days, you don't appreciate it. I said, but you're going to be able to tell the whole world for the rest of your life you represented the flag in your country, etc. But I'll tell you, I have to give a lot of credit to the parents and their support. I spent a lot of times on court, and so did Andreas, and we went through the all the motions, and they just never gave up. And we had certain things that when you play more paddle, you'll know. I said when you play against better teams, I said all you got to do is be defense, defense, defense. And I have some wonderful friends in Spain, by the way. But and I said the Spanish have this thing about Canadians. Not that all you got to do is stay in the point, and they're going to get frustrated, and and that's what happened all the way through. All the three, and they got frustrated, and they ended up beating us anyway. But as it turned out, that. What do you call it? You finish playing against Spain, and it's I don't know, like Jamaica playing against Canada in hockey or something, right? So but we did fairly well, and that momentum took us there. We ended up meeting Mexico and Brazil, and which is like unbelievable. But what a moment that was for everybody.
Well, and again, to go back to everything that you had done to build it, and starting with that Calgary warehouse, Bill, and to see it kind of evolve into what it did. I mean, did you have any sense that that was the plan when you were beginning to build this? Was the goal to be on the world stage?
Well, yeah, yeah, one of my, yeah, I have the big vision things, like in a lot of ways in paddle, anyways, years ahead. of where a lot of people are. Just my training, my background, I guess my family. We don't think small, we think big. I didn't. What actually, I'd go the other way. What surprised me, Mike, because I saw what was happening around the world. What surprised me was the fact that we didn't get more traction, that we didn't have more interest. We were so far away from the epicenter. Like if you and I are in Sweden and we were talking to an investor, he said, "Listen, let's take a boat, let's take a train, and we're in Spain and Portugal, and paddles there, right?" Whereas in our case, it was so far away that it took a long time. So I'm somewhat frustrated in that I helped when I was as a vice president of the World Federation. I helped a lot of countries start from scratch, and they just way took us over, and even to this very day, and we stayed a little bit behind, but
Well, and tell me about that work, Bill. Tell me about going around the globe and helping other countries get, involved in the game, and what was that experience like in that part of your life?
well, wonderful. Incredible, actually. I was invited by one of I believe it might have been Italy, that said, "Listen, you should be on the board of the World Federation." I said, "You're not big in Canada, but and I ended up finding out later on that there's two official languages in paddle. There's English and Spanish. So for the 12 years that I was there, I was the only bilingual guy that the World Paddle Federation had in their directorship. I did the translations and all that other stuff, but they charged me with said, "Listen, why don't you, because of your this and etc., why don't you take over the membership portfolio?" And what that meant was, I'd get calls. We would get calls that would be transferred to me. Said, "Bill, there's somebody from Sweden, Lithuania, Ireland. That they wanted to do this paddle thing." So I would take them literally. Let's say you would have phoned me, and the best example is a fellow from Sweden. I still remember his name. His name is Tommy Anderson was his name, and he phoned me up in 2010, and he says, "Listen, I did this paddle thing. I built a court in my backyard. What do I do now?" I go, "Well, what do you want to do?" Yeah, he said, "Well, I love the sport. I want to go and bring it to Sweden." So that's as an example, I just duplicated what I did. I say, "Okay, so what you got to do is you have to create an association first, because that gives you structure. If people say, 'Is this a Tommy Anderson game or what?' No, no, I said, I have an association. We represent our flag, our country, and then as soon as you do that, Tommy, let's get you into the World Paddle Federation, so that now you have bigger structure that you can go by." So that was 2010. And by 2014, in Sweden, it just went crazy. But I ended up putting together because you can't just say, "Listen, my name, my address, and I have this." So I ended up putting together about it was 8 points that you needed to do in order for you to qualify to make a petition to join the World Paddle Federation. They're still being used today. And so you go through, you got to do your bylaws, you got to do nonprofit, there's a whole bunch of things you need to do to give you the same structure in every country. So that was a proud moment for me, in that, it worked to the point. So anytime somebody joined, they're using the same idea. And I got to travel. I went to Japan and Ireland and Portugal and all these other places, and deal where they invited me, said, "Look, you helped us, so come on over, we'll cut ribbons and smile a lot."
We can do that.
So
Yeah.
so that was an incredible. I sat at the Federation meetings when we were deciding that the width of the paddle court is going to be 38 mils. No, no, Mike says they want to be 40 mils. No, it's too big. And no, then Larry says they want to be 36. And then the net has to be done like this, and then the lighting, and then the turf. So all of the stuff that we see on the paddle courts, I shouldn't say all of the stuff, a lot of it. I was so fortunate to sit there. I actually got an opinion on it. I said, "No, I don't think this is." No, I'm not claiming anything, but the fact that can you imagine? Can you imagine sitting there? I don't know, in a hockey meeting, I don't know, 100 years ago, and saying, "Listen, we want the red line and the blue line and all this." Well, that experience was unforgettable, and the friendships and the friends and the contacts I have all over the planet are just almost infinite, and so that was really, I tell you, really
Well, to
fortunate
be
for
able to
that.
lend after everything you had done to that point, Bill, the chance to be able to weigh in, to have a voice at the table, and to have an influence on that, and certainly the level of respect that the room would have had at that point for all that you had done already, and your passion. And I think that's probably your greatest asset. I think your passion, is just, it's so infectious, and I think that passion can, how do I want to say this? Like, passion is such an important part of success, and whatever our endeavor is. If we're not passionate, we've always said we've got two boys, one's 28, Bill, the other 25. And we've always said to both of the kids, passion before paycheck. And what we always meant by that was, if you don't believe in what you're doing, it will not work out well, and it never ends well. So yeah, what a moment. But for those that are playing the game today, and I think this is one of the things that I hope, in some small way, podcasts like mine and others are able to share and shed the light on the game a bit more. But people walk into play. There's people playing paddle in Canada somewhere right now as you and I are talking. And probably many of them don't have a deep appreciation or even a narrow appreciation for what has happened and how it is that they're there this morning. So yeah, I think getting that story out and sharing that's a really important thing to do. Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting one, Mike, because the 2022 Ignacio Sotoborja, which basically is the almost a co-founder of Paddle in Mexico, dear friend of mine, he put together what he calls the Paddle Museum. And so he invited me and Ed Thompson, who was the founder of Paddle in the United States. He invited me and Ed. We're called the Three Amigos. So we went to Acapulco to this big to do and the Paddle Museum. So I was inducted in the Paddle Museum, and I said, "Listen, I much appreciate it and all that, but I'm not a dinosaur. It's usually dinosaurs you put in museums, but it was a fun thing, and the history, really, the early stage history that is massive, because I remember Ignacio and Ed and I said, listen, Ed said, look, I want to have a tournament in Houston, and he said, well, can you bring some guys over and fly the flag? And Ignacio, he said, well, it's going to be tough, Ed, but I'll figure it out. And we did figure it out, and we go. But it wasn't. But it was a whole bunch of passionate guys doing it for the sport. It was money. In fact, I do golf tournaments to subsidize trips for people to go to these places, right? And so it was all passion. And the Three Amigos, when we talk, it was the same thing. People just don't appreciate it. In 2022 as well, in November, we went to Malaga, Spain. And in Malaga, Spain, it was Enrique Corcuera, which is the inventors of the game's son, Ignacio from Mexico, myself and Ed, that were invited to go to that big symposium, paddle symposium there, to talk about what we're talking about now. I mean, what happened in those early days? I said, well, and so we sat there. I said, and somebody asked me a question from the crowd. I said, look, there's a whole bunch of guys that are around here that are making 2, 3, 400,000 euros a year playing the sport. There's people that are making a lot of money making courts with paddles and tourism and all that. Well, you know where it started. It started by what I just told you, Mike. A bunch of crazy guys early on. We were all friends. There was no hanky panky stuff, and you all supported each other for the love of the sport. So that's
Well, you know what I miss, Bill? I miss the handshake. And what I mean by the handshake is there was a time when you could sit across the table from someone, make a deal, shake hands, and stick to it. And, we ran a small company here in Ontario, Bill, for about 50 years, part of our family uh, and part of our legacy. And we're very proud of the work that we did with that organization. But, we weren't disappointed when the boys decided they didn't want to be the third generation. And the reason for that was we just saw such uh, you know, a delusion of loyalty and trust, and everything became contract driven. And yeah, I kind of missed it. I got into the family business in the late 80s, just sort of on the cusp of that starting to shift and change. But I remember very vividly when the realization that had shifted. So to hear, the origins of the game and the trust and the friendships that get developed, all for the betterment of the game, promoting the game and doing it in a way that made sense. Yeah. Yeah. And the money, it's an interesting part of the conversation today, Bill, because, we can apply this brush to a lot of different things in the world today. But, when we start putting profit before people, it doesn't end well. And when an opportunity is there, inevitably somebody's going to come along and try to figure out a way to make money off of it. So, you can't avoid it, but you're just hoping that, the game is the most important part and continues to be the most important part of that. So.
Well, it's happening today, Mike. And I go to a bunch of seminars and stuff, there was some investors at the last symposium I went to, and it's, what do you think, Bill, that would make for a good club? So I said, well, it's multi-use, multi-purpose, an epicenter for activity and this and that. Bring the moms and dads. Yeah, I know. Well, what are you going to charge per hour per court? I go, well, that's part of it. I said, first of all, you got to create the atmosphere. You got to create the club, and then so then, well, I don't care about that. I want to put an automatic pay system so that I wouldn't have to have staff, and the conversation for me, I just went, all you hear is, that Charlie Brown, I said, okay, if that's what you want to do with my sport, not my sport, I don't want to talk to you. Now, if you want to build a community, you want to be a hub of the community. Paddle is part of it. You bring the kids, you bring everybody. Then we can talk, and the money will come from service and from the people having fun. But if you go into it to say, "Listen, I'm going to make $85 an hour instead of 60," because then I don't want to talk to you. But there's a lot of those on the one hand, but on the other hand, though, Mike, we need private money and funding to make clubs and stuff. So there's a balance, but there's a saying that in the old town of my mom and dad used to say to me, is just be careful not to leave the kitchen door open because the cockroaches will get in. And he says, but there's never just one cockroach, so we can't keep the door closed, but there's much more of us, let's say, than there are of the people that will look at our sport as just an opportunity. They'll move on to the next gig.
Yeah. Well, what's happening in pickleball. I had a chance yesterday to speak. It was very, very, just a tremendous opportunity to speak to a pickleball Hall of Famer yesterday, a guy named Steve Peranto.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And, he's much, he was in the first tournament ever organized in 1976 and, great legacy in the game, but all about the, advocating for the sport, Bill, and wanting it to remain what it once was. And, we didn't get into a deep discussion on it, but Steve is one of those guys, and there are many of them in the Hall of Fame that are concerned about, I think, how the sport's, evolving and paddle technology and where all of that's heading. So, yeah, well, that's all been really terrific. Can we wrap this part of it up, Bill, by you giving me a sense of where the sport is today in Canada? You've mentioned briefly that it's kind of maybe in a holding pattern right now. Can you expand on that a bit for me? Give me a sense of where it is and where you would like to see it go, let's say over the next couple of years, and what needs to happen in order for that to occur.
Yeah, if we had this conversation, let's say 3 years ago, even, it would be different when it comes to this topic right now, because there was one club in Montreal. They were thinking about it in Toronto, nothing in Vancouver, nothing, just Calgary, basically. But since then, I attribute it a little bit to the quick growth in the United States. That we all travel amongst like this, and even in Calgary, people. I was in Houston and they were playing paddle, and how come we don't have more clubs? And I was in Arizona or LA or whatever. So because of the buzz and activity, and I mean, Agassi is in it, and not Maradona, geez. A lot of the big people are playing over there, so they've created a lot of buzz, and it's sort of spilled over to us now. So the investors over here seem to say, okay, well, you got a club in New York that's charging $120 an hour to play, and they have all this and that and the other. So where we're at today is and I going back a little bit, I get phone calls all the time from people with ideas, and I'm helping. I always help him. So we have from Halifax all the way to Victoria, a lot of interest in the sport, creating clubs and expanding clubs. So I think it's beautiful. Now we have a stronghold in Montreal. Finally, we have a stronghold in the Toronto area, a little bit in Ottawa coming. Vancouver's now about three clubs. Calgary is still the epicenter as far as activity goes. Not for long. For now it is, and Edmonton has one club.
Okay.
So I'm happy with where we are the last, say, 18 months.
Great.
I mean, it took 33 years to get here, but
Sure.
the 18 months are here. And I think it's unstoppable
Yeah.
um, I'm going to take my nonprofit hat off and put my other one on. And whether you like it or you like it or not, you take one tennis court. If you and I are owners of a club, you take one tennis court and you say, well, the most I can have there is 2-on-2, and it's usually 1-on-1. Or you can take that same square footage and go 1, 2, 3 paddle courts. Now we have 4, 8, 12. It's a racket light sport. It's just an extra add-on to my membership. I'm not saying, listen, we're going to go from paddle to archery or anything. And it makes a lot more sense to be able to do that. Not just that, there's golf courses that have spoken to us, said, listen, you
Oh,
should put paddle in there.
okay.
Why? Because, well, you have the membership, you have the land, you have the pro shop, you have the change room, you have the rest, you have everything. And well, why would we do that? Well, it's a sport that it's something different, and it's fitness, it's exercise. So they're saying, yeah, maybe you're right. What are we going to do with this chunk of land over there? They're putting a lot of the developments that are there in Europe. For instance, if you want to build I don't know, 50 homes, you put some paddle courts in there. As it used to be tennis, right? Just tennis, which is great, but now it's spilled to a lot of paths. So when it comes to the Canadian development, I just if it just duplicates today what has happened in the last 18 months, I'd be thrilled. That means we'd have uh, pretty well across Canada, Saskatchewan and Manitoba. I've had some calls, but not that many. But basically, pretty well everywhere else Canada wide, it's really taken off. So. Um, yeah, that's
That's great.
just keep it going.
Yeah, it's great. Well, it's nice to hear the enthusiasm, Bill, because you've been through so much. You mentioned that died 3 times when it first started, not any fault of anyone's, just circumstance, and things happen. So you kind of pick up the pieces and get the defibrillator out and give it a shot, and away we go again. So yeah, to hear it's alive and well today and doing great is terrific. So, well, thank you for all of that. One of the things and going back and watching the video and the podcast that I did with Andreas earlier, which we've mentioned, Bill, the one thing I was embarrassed after the fact. We're trying to, I'm embarrassed because I forgot to ask about the game specifically and how it's played. And it was a big miss on my part. We just got so engaged in our conversation. I was careful with the clock, as I mentioned earlier. So I just lost track of that. So one of the most important parts of my conversation with you today is this is going to be heard by people that may have never heard of the game, possibly, but probably primarily by people that have heard of paddle or Padel, as they like to say. And I think they're going to be curious how it's played. We understand the game of pickleball. And if there's one thing about pickleball that's hard to figure out, it's the scoring. So could you walk me through, if I'm coming to you and saying, explain the game to me, how do I play? Can you walk me through how the game is structured and how it's played?
We would be here an hour, but I do free clinics at our club. A lot of the people that play paddle in Calgary have gone through my rickety old free clinics on Saturday mornings. And so if I pretend that you just showed up and you might, my first question to you, have you had a racket sport? You might say yes, and you might say no. If you say yes, we will play off of tennis, squash, or racquetball. I go, well, it's first of all, we go through the grip, and it's a basic grip. You go through the stance, and then it's a doubles game. Then I explain to them the scoring. Scoring is tennis, 15 love, 30 deuce. I'm sorry, but we should have said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but we didn't. So that's what it is. And then we go into I say paddle is a patience game. Paddle is a spin game. It's a soft game until the ball is hanging, and then that's when you can attack it and hit it hard. So you want to hit a lot of spin into the corners and make them die. You want to keep the ball alive. The only thing you do is hit the ball over the net. I don't care where it goes. You're forcing the other people to play. So one of the biggest strategies you have is that. So when we start, I actually have people get used to the racket first, and the power of the racket, because it's actually, even though it doesn't have strings, as you know, it's actually, the ball comes off of it pretty quick. So you wanna play. It's an underhand serve. So I say it takes 30 seconds instead of 30 years to learn how to serve. We're not throwing it up in the air. And when you're serving, you just get the ball in, because unless you're at an elite level, you're just starting the point. So start the point, get going. We have a whole bunch of drills where you cannot get a point until the ball goes over the net 3 times. You go, well, why is that? because you want to get into the point, you just hit it over. You don't win paddle on the first or second or third point. You got to wait until people, get out of position. So basically, it's just it's a sport where you hit the ball soft. You have patience. If one of the best shots you can hit is a lob, believe it or not, you say,
Yes.
"Oh my God, the ball's over my head." So you
Right.
get up there, you hit a lob back. It gives you and your partner a chance to readjust, and you're back there again. When it comes to the walls, I can't show you here, but basically what I do is I stand people. I said most of the time, as humans, you throw something and your first reaction is you want to go get it. Okay, well, what happens in paddle is the same thing. So I bounce the ball, it hits the wall, and the first reaction, if you haven't played, is you turn around, you want to go get the ball, and then you realize the ball's going the other way. So I said, that's, eventually, I know it's frustrating now, but eventually the walls are going to be your friend, because if you can read the speed, you say, well, not going to play this. I'm just going to let it bounce. And as it's coming to the middle of the court, I can meet it at the middle of the court and just put the point away, as opposed to, just standing there and you can't do it. So the game is played in conjunction. There's a lot of conversation between players. You got to always say, it's my ball, it's your ball, hit a lob, look out. And so it's not a quiet game, let's say. So you have to always be in communication with your partner. uh, Lobs are a good shot. You have to hit a lot of spin because it makes the ball die. If you hit top spin, the ball will bounce, crawl up the wall, and be way up here, as opposed to slicing it into the back corner. And that's basically it. The other thing is the volley is a lot of times all you do is just grab the, I in beginners I just have them stand there. I said, look, you just hold your paddle and don't do nothing, and I'll throw the ball at them. The ball will hit the paddle and it'll actually go back. I go, you see, your objective number one is to get to the ball and you paddle to the ball, and then most of the time it's going to work for you. Again, if we go back to golf, you can't just put your club there. You got to do something with it. Well, with paddle, you use the energy coming your way, right? You might just hit the ball towards me. I'm going to use your energy and I'm going to do something with that energy. Either stop it, angle it, slice it, or lob it. Do something to that effect. And you're going back and forth with your player. So in badminton we play this way a lot of times, right? Or front and back. In paddle, your windshield wise. So if the ball's on this side of the court, you go this way. If the ball's on the other side of the court, you go that way. You can't do this. You always want to come to the middle. Or if the ball is to the net, you go forward, both, or you go back if it's a lob. So you're always like this. So it's almost like you have a string tied between you. So you work in conjunction with your partner. You talk to your partner. It's a game with it's almost like chess on a pitch. You don't. If you When I first watched the top players play, initially I said, "Geez, this can't be the top guys." Because you're hitting these little soft dinky dingy, oh, boom, all of a sudden the ball's away. Ah, so they're setting it up. And this is, even if you just start, you need to set up your point. Don't hurry up and try and win the point, because you're going to end up losing. And just have patience and more patience and more patience. Eventually the shot will be there for you to do what you wish with. But it's a patience game, fun game, and you have to talk.
It's always a doubles game. I just want to clarify this. It's never played as singles, always a doubles. You mentioned earlier that the size of the court would basically, on a single tennis court, you could stack 3 paddle courts. So that gives the listener,
Sideways.
a sense of kind of the size of the court. We've got a solid wall on each end. We've got some kind of fencing around. And tell me about the surface that you're playing on specifically. You're calling it a pitch, but what is that made of? Is it a synthetic product?
I've played on three. Yeah, I've played on 3 surfaces. One is, if you put the paddle court, the 33 by 66-foot rectangle on a tennis court, you're playing on basically asphalt with rubberized paint, right? I've played on where we have our little club in Calgary, inside a hockey arena. We have a sport court. They're plastic squares. Okay, so that's a second. And then most, if not everybody in the world, plays paddle on artificial turf. It's artificial turf with a little bit of sand in it to give a little bit of slippage, as opposed to, grabbing and coming over. So I've played on all 3. The one that I like the best, believe it or not, is the plastic ones, because they're not. There's a little bit of give there, and I have an Achilles issue, and so if I plant, yeah, if I plant then it doesn't take me long for me to wobble around, but on that in that court, but. The official court, if you want to call it that, plays on turf,
Nice.
artificial turf.
Okay. And
Yeah.
Bill, a moment ago, you'd pulled the paddle off the shelf behind you. Do I see a ball back there as well, hiding, or is it just the paddle?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could, yeah.
No. Yeah. I mean, these are Dunlop, but everybody's making them now.
Okay.
Um, the paddle balls, they're like tennis balls, right? But they're a little
Okay.
bit smaller and heavier.
Ah,
The reason being, these paddles are so powerful that if we use a regular tennis ball for the better players, for me, I can still you can keep a rally going, but for the better players like Andres, he'll stand back at the service line, smash the ball, it'll hit the other side and come back to him.
wow.
If you use a regular tennis ball, because these are heavier and smaller, it keeps it for the top players. It
Hmm.
keeps the ball alive longer because you can't put it away as quickly, right? You can't just go boom and it's away.
Okay.
So they're they've decided to make them a little bit small, but it's a tennis ball.
Okay.
It's
That's
just a sort of like a
sure.
baby tennis ball, and you see how the ball bounces off the face of these things really quickly. So that's the thing you got to learn is is uh, is basically if you just take it back, 4 inches and move it forward, the ball's going to go half the court anyway. So that's the control. The control that you need on playing paddle is very important. It's not a power game. It's a slice game. It's a patience game. It's a lob game until somebody like me leaves it short. Then you walk up and you put it away.
And that's it.
But
Yeah. And that paddle, Bill, today, is that a new paddle? Like, is that sort of what the paddles look like today?
well, this has got special. There's a fellow, a paddle manufacturer in Spain.
Okay.
This is actually about 80% recyclable.
Oh, wow.
Like,
Okay.
and this is really unique, and I love it the way it plays. It's got natural fibers on here, and it's got some silver and everything else. Here, um, this is just. I mean, I got a lot of. This is just another paddle. It's got that Eva foam.
Okay.
Okay, this is not a recyclable thing. It's got Eva foam and it's got all the resins and stuff. These guys here are leading edge, to be honest with you. But yeah, I mean the paddles. If I close my eyes and I hit the ball, I will realize it because I know what this is. But if you just start, um, you know, I don't. You're not going to really find a difference, very much of a difference in it. The other thing is I've imported paddles, not as a business necessarily, because I want people to play with good equipment, and it's a lot more enjoyable that way. Like if I where is it? If I were to play with my original paddle, sort of get off screen, but if I were to play with my original paddle and I hit the ball here. It's first of all, it's going to go clang like this, and second of all, the ball's not going to go anywhere because this is a chunk of plywood and it's very heavy, very hard. Whereas this one here, the ball will hit on the edges. So the forgiveness of playing with a good racket, I'm sure it's like that in pickleball as well. Playing with a good racket, even if you don't hit it right in the middle, it's still going to go pretty well. That's why I want guys, especially beginners, because it's frustrating enough learning a new activity, but if you give them the best possible equipment. So as quickly as I can get new players to pick up a paddle, a decent one to play, they enjoy it that much more. But yeah, paddle technology is just mind-boggling what's happened over the last 10 years.
Yeah, it's happening, Bill. Is there any fear within paddle? I know there is in pickleball that technology is going to shift the game in a way that's not necessarily good for the game. Is there something happening on the paddle side that would concern you as a paddle person at this point?
I think it already has happened. Like initially they didn't have paddle balls, and as the technology of paddles were coming, the points for the top players were getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So if he had let's say a really good tennis player, a tall, really good tennis player, there's no way you could hit a lob because he would just put it away. The ball's too so we adjusted by doing this. the what do you call it? The paddles. The reason we adjusted a little bit by not going more than 38 mil, because if you go 40 mil or more, it's almost like, you're gonna the ball's gonna explode off the face. So we're limiting it to that. Now there's no limits on how many holes you put in or the material you use. Like golf, for instance, they have the shaft technology and ball technology, but we adjusted a little bit on that already. The other thing that hadn't dawned on us that it's starting to, because a lot of paddle is going into residential areas, is the noise factor.
Yes. Yes.
I know that in pickleball it's an issue, and there are people working on that. The noise factor with a smaller ball, in my view, a heavier ball, it's not as much as it would have been with a ball that you can really whack. But that might be something that needs to be addressed later on. Right now, it seems to be we're kind of getting away with it, but I mean, 7:30 in the morning Sunday, if you're playing paddle, it's my ball, it's your ball, and whacking smashes might not go over too well. But
Yeah. Well, Bill, there's always challenges, isn't there? There's always a challenge to something. But yeah, I was curious what your thoughts were on that, because I think there's a lot of concern within pickleball today, to speak of, that racket sport, about the technology changing the game, the pace of the game, the safety of the game in some ways, because the ball speed that some of these top players are able to generate off these new paddles. I mean, these plastic balls are moving at 65 or 75 miles an hour, and there's a
yeah, you
danger.
don't want to get that in.
No,
Yeah,
no, and there's a lot of
yeah.
talk about mandatory eye protection and where that sits, and where that responsibility for that lies, whether it's with the player, with the local club, with Pickleball Ontario, Pickleball Canada. So interested in your thoughts on how that's all going. So, well, Bill, I'm watching the clock, so I'm going to be careful here. I have a couple of final questions, and then I'd like you to kind of close out with it.
You're good. You're good to go.
I love it.
Yeah.
If you could go in a time machine today and go back to 1992 or maybe beyond, were there any decisions that you made or the sport had made that you kind of would look back on? You mentioned kind of briefly the scoring, perhaps you might have approached that a bit differently. Is there anything about today's modern game that you kind of wish you had thought about 20 years, 30 years ago? Is there anything that pops out in your mind in that regard?
Well, there was a big adjustment that initially I disagreed with. That we had an early adjustment, and in the Latin countries,
Yeah.
you used to serve and wait.
Okay.
It means you couldn't serve and go and play the ball. And in Europe, they call serve and volley. So you'd have your partner at the net, you serve and you go to the net, and you could play the ball when it came back the first time.
Okay.
It was found after a few years and some arguments that the sport would be better off serving and going to the net. It was more exciting that way.
Sure.
So that the early decisions on that would be we might have moved to turf earlier,
Mm-hmm.
than we did, because playing on hard court, again, the points are smaller and the injuries are more. So you might have done that. The lighting that we had in the early days was not properly done. They would put them in the corners and you'd be half blinded. Now they're putting them in the edges and they're curving them in. So that was a decision that might have been made. The net was higher then, and it's a bit lower now. So turf ball. But these things, I think sometimes you just have to, like you were saying, you just have to work through them and say, why don't we do this? And then it was, but no, when it comes to tournament wise or anything of the sort that we might have done differently, I don't know. I think well, it's sport and life, it just, things happen, and then you just adjust to them. I mean, had we had the foresight of, the paddles and the balls and everything else, 30 years ago would have been, but it wasn't ready for it then, right? It just, things have its time, It's like they couldn't have invented the light bulb in the 1600s.
No, it's true. This is true. Yeah. Well, and the reason I'm fascinated by that question, Bill, is I curl a little bit as well. I took up curling this fall, and they implemented some new brushing or sweeping rules in January, Curling Canada. And, here's a sport that's been around longer than time itself. And yet it's still evolving and it's still growing. And I'm fascinated by that because, pickleball is still a relatively young sport in comparison to others, golf, curling, paddle, certainly in certain parts of the world. if not globally, still considered somewhat of a young sport, I suppose. So it's always fascinating that the sport's willing to recognize that we didn't necessarily get everything right, but how could we? How could we possibly see into the future and recognize that the technology might shift the game? And you mentioned golf. You've been a golf player and a pro and a teacher and a coach for much of your life too, Bill. And people like Tiger Woods came along and they changed the game. I mean, the game that Jack Nicklaus played was not the game Tiger Woods played, and even just his entourage, he had a whole team of nutritionists and dietitians and, fitness people. And I mean, Jack had nothing but a steering wheel in the car, and he drove himself from tournament to tournament with Barbara and the kid.
Yeah. Chichi Rodriguez was smoke and drink beer while he was playing golf. But it's just the way that these things develop. It's just incredible. You can't have a foresight for all of that. But the last rule that we changed for paddle, it just came on board now, is we're finding that people are getting taught so well that the rallies were going so long. So when you get to deuce, in reality, the deuce points were probably longer than the actual game points, because you got to win by 2 points, right? Like you do in tennis. So my ad, your ad, my ad. So what they're doing now is they're saying, listen, after the second deuce point, the next point wins. So that's been the latest adjustment, to my understanding, the latest adjustment that the rule for tournaments anyway, that just to make sure that we don't, I booked the court for an hour and a half. I only got a match and a half in. That's because your deuces were half the. But yeah, so that's probably the biggest change. Yeah.
Well, Bill, we've talked about a lot, and I appreciate everything that you've shared with me this morning. I appreciate your time. Closing question for you before I give you a chance to touch on anything that we didn't touch on that you'd like to mention. But when you look back at everything, all the way back to that first day that you saw the game and ultimately all the things that have happened since then, what are you most proud of in all of that?
I get I don't know if proud, but I get an incredible sense of self-satisfaction whenever I see somebody play paddle. Like if I saw you playing paddle, I don't care where, because in the back of my mind, whether it's true or not, I say to myself, you know what? Had I not been such a hard head and just stuck with it, maybe paddle wouldn't be here, and they wouldn't be enjoying it. The greatest thing, to this very day, when I see somebody play paddle, I go, I kind of had something to do with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good for you.
So that gives me a great pleasure.
Great answer.
But no, I don't have. I would do everything over, the same thing over and over again. I think, sure, I might have, done things a little bit differently, but who's to know? At the time, you have this kind of information, they have this situation, that's how you act. So, but the fact that people are playing paddle in Canada today gives me great pleasure. That's for sure. That sense of it's kind.
Good for you. Well, let me just say very genuinely and very sincerely, Bill, I just admire your spirit and I admire the work. And I don't think anyone can deeply and fully appreciate what it took to get the sport to where it is, in the moment today. And so I just want to congratulate you on all of that. And the world needs more Bills. Like we really do. We need people that are willing to take the bull by the horn and run with something and drive that off of a platform of passion, not profit. And so I applaud you for all of that. Final thing, is there anything that we didn't touch on today, Bill, that you were hoping we'd mention in the podcast? I just want to give you a chance to toss anything else that maybe I didn't think of today. I'm trying to, not have another moment where I think, darn, I should have asked him about that. But did we miss anything today?
No, I want you to have another moment. That means we'll have an opportunity to talk again. Because if
love it, love it. Yeah.
I think basically. And one of the things I like about this also, Mike, is hopefully it gives people a little bit of a sense that this just didn't happen. Like it took a lot, whole bunch of stuff, things that came together so that you can go to Toronto tomorrow and play on a beautiful glass court with a nice paddle and have some good competition. So this, what we're doing today, hopefully plants a little seed in people's mind. It says, something had to happen for us to be on the court and enjoying it. So that's, like I said at the beginning, really appreciate you taking interest and this is very, very helpful for our sport.
Well, you've been generous beyond description, Bill. And I think, when I spoke to Andreas and he mentioned you, and I could just, in his answers and almost in his eyes, the passion that he has for both the sport and for you, it was very evident to me. And so when the opportunity to talk to you directly came about, I didn't hesitate. I mean, it was when that email came in, you made my day, you made my week. I was so thrilled that you reached out and complimented the conversation that we had. And so the chance to meet you today and to spend a bit of time with you has been absolutely my pleasure. So I thank you.
So I was going to say, so you just spoke to Canada's paddle royal family, because all the Stamiles play paddle, and we all enjoy it. And like I say, watching everybody else plays gives us great joy.
Good. Well, Bill, the whole intent of the podcast is not to monetize it in any way. It's never been the thought. When I started this back in January, it was simply to spread the word and share the stories behind the paddle, whether that be a pickleball paddle or a paddle or, any of that. I just think, the community behind racket sports for me has been, a really welcome thing in my life. And I've come to meet some of the most amazing people. And so as I did that, and as I started thinking about their stories, I thought, we want to tell that. There's a lot of podcasts out there that talk about products and tips and all of that. And that's great. We need that. But we also need to understand the people like we have with you today and the stories behind the paddle. So I appreciate you doing that today. Thank you for being here.
Okay, I appreciate it, and hopefully this won't be the last time you and I talk.
Well, I'm going to hold you to that, because I'd like to touch base down the road and get a catch-up call with you. So I'm going to mark that in my calendar that I've got an open invitation to reach out.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it.